exciting features in Microsoft Purview DLP, which is Network DLP. Network DLP was introduced last year, started with Netscope and iBoss as secure service edge solutions, and very recently expanded to Entra Global Secure Access, which really opens the possibilities of kicking the tires on Network DLP to understand how it would fit in an overall protection strategy that you might have in conjunction with cloud-based DLP and endpoint DLP, and maybe even edge in browser protections, which I'll cover in another video. So today we're going to talk about Network DLP and how you can try all this with global secure access for relatively low cost, and we'll talk about what you need from a licensing standpoint and then walk through a couple of scenarios. I'm not going to cover everything from the GSA setup because honestly it's quite lengthy, but I will cover some of the high-level things necessary to be able to try this on the Purview side. So let's get started. First things first, GSA is a paid offering. GSA is available as individual components, either with an internet access or a private access, which is honestly very similar to Zscaler's ZPA and ZIA. Or you can buy it as a bundle with global secure access, or you can buy it as part of the Entra suite. As always, Microsoft M365 Maps is your friend. And the good news is, if you have an E5 license, you have Entra ID P2. And there's a step-up SKU available to be add on to an Entra ID Plan 2 plan, where you can get the entire Entra suite, private access, internet access, and ID governance, as well as Verified ID Premium, stacked on top of an existing, essentially E5 license. And it runs about $10, $11 a month. So it's not a huge cost element to grab some licenses and kick the tires on this. So that's probably your best avenue. Honestly, I wouldn't go for any of the individual components because you might as well buy a trial of Entra Suite and be able to look at some of the identity governance features at some point. So first things first, what's required from a network DLP standpoint on the GSA side? So GSA is going to include a couple of things. And if you're unfamiliar with SSE technology in general, SSE is Secure Service Edge. The 800-pound gorilla in this market is Zscaler. So instead of a VPN, you have more of a user-based targeting from a policy standpoint, as opposed to like a full tunnel or split tunnel VPN. SSEs are really great, and GSA brings some very interesting features to the table in the sense that it's tied into conditional access. So you can require GSA to be active to be able to access certain cloud applications, which opens up, honestly, a whole realm of possibilities in terms of how to structure GSA and leverage it as part of a zero trust posture. But to get it going, there's some steps, right? First things first, you're going to have to do TLS inspection. TLS inspection is required. That's going to place a root certificate on the endpoints. We'll be able to break the encryption and actually look at the contents of the files running over the wire, as opposed to relying on, say, endpoint DLP or cloud-based DLP or edge. We're going to be operating in the network layer, which means we can catch things like browsers and desktop apps and APIs and all manner of things that other enforcement planes in Purview wouldn't be able to capture. We're going to need an internet access profile created. We need a file policy created and a security profile. What do those two things mean? Let's go over into global secure access, and I want to show a couple of settings in here. And global secure access has this notion of security profiles, and security profiles are bundles of policies. And in GSA, you can do web content filtering, file policies, prompt policies, threat protection policies, whole manner of things. But you lump them all together into a security profile, and then you assign that security profile to a user or a group of users. And for this particular scenario, I need at least a TLS inspection to be able to crack SSL encryption. And I also need it to do file scanning. If I come over to file policies right here, and you'll see I have one that I made called default GSA file scanning. The rules right here are relatively simple. Scan with Purview. And the way these work is you look for download and upload. You look for a web category, of which there are 69 or 70 of these available. You can also add your own at some point. And you also put a URL in here if you want. I'm looking for Word documents, PDFs, EXEs, things like that. I can go in and select the rest of these, which honestly, I didn't realize that I didn't select when I did it. So we'll go ahead and add those. Those might have been new since the last time I did this. Other destinations you can add, web category, FQDN, or URL. Right? So this tells GSA that if it matches these conditions, Word document, things along those lines, send it over to Purview to be scanned. This is half of the puzzle, and you need to set up all the GSA stuff first, and then you go over to Purview and you set up collection policies and network DLP policies. But at a bare minimum, we need a file policy inside of a security profile linked to a particular set of users. And then you also have to send people through GSA. Well, how do you do that? Just like a, say, Defender for Cloud Apps reverse proxy policy with conditional app access, for GSA, it's very similar. You require GSA as part of a policy. If I come over here, I've got my default GSA security policy. You can see I'm targeting specific users in my test tenant. All internet resources with global secure access, which means I'm going to target every internet resource, right? Session conditional access network control selected, and I get to pick the security profile that I want to link to those users. So you can control which security profile gets targeted by which conditional access policy. Honestly, you could spend all day in the rabbit hole of trying to design this. But from a simplistic standpoint, I've got to punt users over into GSA. Now, that's the server-side setup, right? From a client-side standpoint, it's got to be Entra-bound or hybrid-bound, obviously. The GSA in client needs to be installed either manually or with Intune. And there's some configuration settings for installing GSA. Honestly, the setup of this could be better. It's not a single-click button in Intune right now. You have to package the application manually. You need to set some Edge and Chrome profiles, disable Quick, disable DNS over HTTPS. I've got these all linked in the blog post, but plan to spend some time, right? It is not single-click right now to set up a lot of the Intune stuff. I wish it was very similar to the way that MDE is deployed. So if you do all of that and you get to that point, you will wind up with a Windows machine with the GSA client connected. And in my instance, I have all 3 channels connected, but what we're looking for is internet right here, right? I'm signed in, it's authenticated, it's got a user context, it knows who I am, and therefore can apply different policies, and it's funneling all of my traffic through this internet connection profile, unless it's M365 or Entra, and then doing file inspection based on the requirements that we put in the file policy. So, what's next? We've done GSA, we've got the client installed, now we have to flip over to Purview. And this is the other half of the story. And this is where things get a little more interesting, honestly. From a Purview standpoint, network DLP, or the network connection to GSA, opens up 2 realms of possibilities. One are some collection policies targeted towards the network profile, and 2 are some DLP policies targeted towards the network profile. If you haven't used collection policies yet, they launched last year in 2025, originally mainly targeted around endpoint and honestly targeted around limiting things that endpoint collected, particularly with endpoint DLP and how it just tends to audit every file, open event, and close, moves its change, things along those lines. Customers in certain areas, particularly in European regions, had concerns from a GDPR standpoint on that data collection. So collection policies can be used to limit collection, which there's a big old warning in here of be mindful how collection policies might impact insider risk, for instance, because you can neuter some of the data feeds into insider risk with limiting what you collect from an endpoint. But the other side of collection policies, and you may have seen this with DSPM for AI, the other side of collection policies light up collection opportunities that normally would not be configured. And from a global secure access standpoint, you've got a couple of things you can capture. And I want to walk through what these look like. When you create a collection policy, it's got a name and description, just like any other. There's a couple of unique requirements in here. Classifiers need to be set to all items, and I'll show why in a second here. When you come over here, text sent, file uploaded, text received, and file downloaded. So your ingress and egress from cloud apps and generative AI. Then you choose your data sources. Here, I've targeted one particular cloud application, the famous DLP test, because it's very easy to go grab a file with SSNs in it and download it, or credit card numbers, and trigger a very simplistic DLP rule here. I also have all unmanaged AI apps. Now, it's important to note that you have these really cool adaptive app scopes. These come from the MDA Cloud App Catalog. And you might be tempted to select the rest of these, but you can't if you want to capture prompts and responses, which is a very interesting capability. So if I click next here, I've got the app option to capture content. AI prompts and responses will be captured and available to discover and protect. Does not include content and shared files. You notice there's a note in here to capture content. Data to detect, you must scope content contains condition to all, meaning all classifiers, and the where to apply step, select only generative AI sources and cloud apps is what I've selected. So I have an individual cloud app, of which you can add additional ones in here just by clicking Add Data Source, clicking on Unmanaged Cloud Apps, and this will search essentially the MDA Cloud App Catalog. And all unmanaged AI apps. That is the only adaptive app scope that supports content capture. If you don't care about prompts and response capture, then you can skip that. But doing prompt and response capture with a collection policy lights up capturing content even from, say, consumer chat applications, and gives you an experience on par with what you see with Copilot in DSPM for AI Classic or DSPM, the new one. So I'm going to choose capture content. Very importantly, I'm going to leave Edge for Business turned off in this scenario. Both Edge for Business and network collection policies are lumped into the same type. Click Next, turn it on, and then it will ultimately take effect. After a while, you will be able to start to see activities show up in DSPM for AI or DSPM in the new DSPM. We come over to Activity Explorer, and we go over to AI activities. An interesting thing to note in my test environment, it's picking up API calls from the ChatGPT desktop app to an endpoint in the cloud service, which is like a heartbeat check-in, and it's miscategorizing some low-hanging fruit sensitive info types that typically get miscategorized. National identification numbers. You've all seen those in Activity Explorer and Data Explorer. So once this loads, you'll be able to see a list of sensitive info types. Here's the one that I was talking about right here. You can see that IP address before. I've got a couple of my EDM match, and of course, all full names, which hilariously matched the all full name Windows NT. So, but this came from the ChatGPT desktop app installed on a test device, not a web browser. And that's one of the cool things that network DLP lights up, because you're doing SSL content inspection as opposed to just relying on capturing stuff in a browser or something like that. So, collection policy lights up collection of data, optional from these. You'll still get matches for DLP policies, and you'll still get the context around them. But if you want to see prompts and responses, a collection policy is required. So you don't have to use collection policies. Collection policies and the DLP policies targeted towards network can be used independently. They're not connected. They obviously complement each other from a discoverability standpoint. And a collection policy to some degree is kind of like a monitor policy, but a little bit different, right? And collection policies will continue to be used in this kind of new frontier. You can also use them in Edge as well, and I'll cover that in another video. So I walk through setting up a network collection policy. You'll I've got all the details and then step through in here, right? But let's come down and actually start talking about network DLP. And last year, this portion showed up in the wizard. Probably annoys you because 99% of the time you pick the one on the left, right? However, for this, you get to click the very new and exciting inline web traffic on the right. Next thing I want to mention is network DLP inspection is not free. It's not included in E5. Groan all you want, but it's a Purview pay-as-you-go feature. If you've not set up the Purview billing model, the portal will yell at you all the time. Simply need a resource group to toss a Purview object in. You need contributor rights to that resource group. And then it'll create a Purview object on the Azure side that simply serves as a billing capacity, right? To do pay-as-you-go metered billing for the things that are not free in Purview now. So it's 50 cents per 10,000 requests. You can monitor usage in the usage center, which is a new feature in the new Purview portal. The pricing for all of the Purview pay-as-you-go model things are in the Azure pricing calculator, oddly enough. So you can go into the pricing calculator, search for Purview, add that, and then see all of that. I've also got a link to the pricing information in the blog post. But from creating a network, creating a DLP policy, let's walk through it and show you what it looks like from a network DLP standpoint. So head over to data loss prevention, go to policies, wait for it to load, and choose inline web traffic. There are no templates for these, so custom. Name and description. As with any other DLP policy, you can rename it later. Now, this is where this looks completely different from most DLP policy wizards, right? So we need to add some cloud apps here. And you'll see that you have unmanaged cloud apps and adaptive app scopes. That's what can be included in a network DLP policy. So I'm going to choose DLP test. I'm going to search for it again here because that honestly is about the easiest way to test this. Come over, choose all unmanaged AI apps. Why not? So now I've got two. Next thing is scoping. Scoping is done at the individual app level or category level. And this is where you do your user targeting. Because if you notice, you didn't get the option to target users anywhere in the wizard so far. So if you want to target specific users or groups or do exclusions, you can do that here. It's worth noting that for a category, if you have subcategories like in the unmanaged cloud apps, you can scope those individually if you want to, or just let the parent scoping take effect. But by default, this would apply to everyone who signed in a GSA that went through that conditional access policy. Enforcement options, uncheck Edge for business in this particular instance. That's a different conversation from network, secure service edge. No template, so we'll go ahead and create a rule. From a condition standpoint, you have your typical content contains as well as file properties, metadata, file couldn't be scanned or opened, and then also insider risk adaptive protection level. For content contains, we have all three of our options: sensitive info types, sensitivity labels, and trainable classifiers, which is really nice. I'm going to choose just credit card because I know that is something that will trigger very easily. Let's talk about actions. There's one of them: restrict browser and network activities. Come in here, you have your four options. If you notice, this is very similar to what you selected in the collection policies. You only have auto to block. There's no override or anything like that currently, or justifications. These are the options you have. Incident report, everything else is very similar from a DLP rule standpoint. Hit save to that. Wait for it to load. And the rest of this is just like the DLP policy wizard. Your simulation mode option, turn it on, or leave the policy turned off. Already I have one of these built, so I'm not going to save that. But what does this look like in practice? Let's go over to my test device here. Here I am on DLP test. Now you notice it didn't capture this, right? Because this is not text center received. I didn't type this in. I didn't paste it in. It wasn't a post. But if I try to download something over here, I am going to get blocked. So I'm going to grab this PDF file of SSN and credit card number. Boom. That's Network DLP with GSA. This is the GSA block page. You can customize this a little bit. Honestly, this probably needs a little more spit and polish from a UI standpoint, because you'll see threat type none found. This doesn't really describe why you couldn't access the destination, but this was done at the network level, meaning this would work in Firefox, in Opera, in a desktop app. If it was trying to grab this file from DLP test. Now, how the app would respond to getting blocked like that would depend, but this is Network DLP blocking. Notice this was not Purview browser extension. It's not endpoint DLP, even though this machine has endpoint DLP on it, and also has, obviously, the Purview extension installed in Edge. So this is yet another enforcement plan. It complements, not necessarily supplants, some of the other enforcement planes that you might have on a Windows device. And it'll be interesting to see where some of this plays out, because some of the things that you can do in Network DLP, you can also do in Edge and browser protections. And you can also do them to some degree in endpoint. So you've got some various options in terms of where to enforce some of these, right? GSA generally would be more targeted towards a corporate-owned device, because you'd have the GSA client on there, but more to come. So let me go over to Activity Explorer, and I've already got a match for this in here from Network DLP. I'm going to click on this. Here's my rule match. You can see DLP rule match. You can see, most importantly, the enforcement plane was network. SSN, high confidence, medium confidence, low confidence right there. You've got the data in here. So, yet another way to capture data and to block data in Purview. More to come in this. There's still some rough edges. Obviously, GSA support is in preview, right? But at the time that I'm recording this, it might be GA by the time it's done. But you'll probably see more capabilities in there as well. As always, sign up for the customer connection groups if you're not a member of them, aka.ms/joinccp. As long as you have an NDA with Microsoft, those are a fantastic resource to get more information about what's going on and participate in roadmap calls. Because this is really an exciting time to be alive, because we now have Network DLP. We've got Edge and browser, which even extends the control plane to personal devices signed into Edge for Business, and managed cloud apps. So there's a lot of movement in this space. Realistically, this is a layer cake approach. I'm going to be covering more of this in further posts to talk about all of the available places that you can block things and control things and capture content from things, because it's very fast moving right now with the explosion of LLMs and the desire to kind of get your arms around and control those. So hopefully this was helpful. As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll see you out there.